Hello, I'm Roger Bisbee from the Skill Builder channel, and I'm standing here beside the statue of a builder called Thomas Cubitt. And this fella was a carpenter. He lived up in Norfolk and he came down to London to seek his fortune. But before he did that, he had to take a little detour via India to raise the money to come back and start a building company in London with his two brothers. Now, not only was he a good builder, he was also a very good employer. And he did some groundbreaking things to look after his employees, which were unheard of in the building industry. I'm going to move away from this noisy traffic and take you up to his home here in Dorking, Surrey, and tell you a bit more about him and have a look at a few of his buildings. So this is Denbies, just outside Dorking town, and this is now a vineyard. It wasn't a vineyard when Thomas Cubitt moved down from London to buy this estate, having made a few quid out of building, and he built himself a large country house overlooking the valley, which sadly isn't here any longer. It was demolished in about 1953, I think, because it was just too large for anybody to handle. It required too many servants. So they built another house, but it's scaled down, still a very nice house by modern standards, but nothing like the palace that he had before. We'll walk up the hill and have a look at that house, and also have a look at the very fine church and the schoolhouse that he built up there, mainly for his workers. It's quite a climb up through the Denbies estate to get up here to Ranmore Common, and this is the church that Thomas Cubitt built primarily for his family, but also for everybody that was employed on the estate, their families. If you look at the seating arrangements, they're quite telling, because in the front pews you've got the family of Cubitt. Behind that, almost in the same row as the Cubitt family, was their carpenter. And it just shows that Thomas Cubitt, being a carpenter, held carpenters in high esteem. And they say he treated his staff like friends, and he probably would have been very cosy with that carpenter. And the carpenter probably would have had respect for him because he knew what he was talking about. I mean, very often building bosses don't actually know very much about the subject. But in this case, because he'd been on the tools, because he'd been a hands-on guy, he could talk to all his staff on equal terms. So I've cycled past this church many times in the past and looked at it and thought, that's a very grand looking church. There isn't even a village around here. Where does that church get its congregation from? And of course, only since I found out about it being part of the Cubitt estate did I understand exactly what was going on here. But it still doesn't fully explain why it is so lavish, because this is a beautiful church. Make no mistake about that. It's got an octagonal tower in the middle, which is a very clever construction. And in that tower, they've got 8 bells. Somebody that was involved in it, he's not credited as such. This isn't one of his churches, but Gilbert Scott, who built the Grand Midland Hotel at the front of St Pancras Station, that wonderful Gothic structure there, and all kinds of other places around London and across the country even. So Gilbert Scott was well known. If you look at the list of churches that he has, he built easily as many as Wren. This was one that he didn't actually put his signature to, but because he and Cubitt were quite cosy, because they knew each other very well, he probably did consult on it. Now, the face of the church is finished off with flintstone, because this being a chalk escarpment, and in chalk you find a lot of flint. It is used decoratively on the face of it, but it's not actually structural. The church is built of sandstone. You can see the blocks there, but these panels have all been done with flint. And it's not napped flints, and napped flint is when they cut the flint in half. But this flint is the whole stone's just laid in mortar, but it stood the test of time very well indeed. If I'm in a church, I like to have a look around the graves and so on. This one's intriguing, isn't it, with the anchor? You'd think this chain was made of metal, but it's all carved out of stone, so they've done all the links and everything. So when we look here, we can see all these little Gothic arches, but look how lavish they are. Every one of these pillars set here, and then the infill's done with the sandstone. These bits of flint are coursed in here. Sometimes they're put in randomly. They're slightly more random in that case, but here they've made sure that they keep courses, straight rows. As I say, it was all picked up from the chalk. There's a real abundance of it around here. So you see it being used in all kinds of buildings and walls. A massive great wall all the way down the hill there, which is about a mile long, all made of flint. So it kept somebody busy, didn't it? But it's still pretty good. The mortar's pretty good, whether they've repointed that. But it's been looked after, this church, which is great to see. Now here's an interesting detail. When you look at these gutters, they're all secret gutters. Possibly, I'm not sure what they're lined with. It may be a bit of copper. It may be a bit of zinc actually. It doesn't look like copper. Copper would be green by now. They are prone to blocking up. That's the only trouble with those. So there's the little outlet in the corner. Brilliantly done, isn't it? The whole thing. When you start looking at the detail up the edge here where they've got those soakers going into the slate. The old decorative rainwater heads there. Each one again secret gutters. You can see the outlets. A bit of deterioration in that sandstone there, but otherwise in pretty good nick. Oh, they've got a slip slate there. It's got to be poked back up. Somebody's used a few tingles on these slates. When they slip, they put a little lead clip or copper clip in there to fix them back in place. What happens is it opens out with the snow and the ice and so on, and the slate falls out again. So what I do, I put them in with a little bit of CT1. I wonder if I could volunteer to do that. So there's a funny little door at the side, and it's got a little cutout in the corner. Looks like a cat door really, but they put some kind of mesh on it. So you'd have to be a very thin cat to get through there. What they've done here is a bit strange really, because they've got this bit of cornice going along here, and they've actually taken it round the rainwater pipe, and you think that was a pretty vulnerable little bit there, wouldn't you, stuck on like that. I don't know why they did that, because they haven't done it elsewhere in the church. So the entrance to this church is actually round the back, which is unusual to say the least. And the reason for that is that actually it was accessed by this footpath which led directly to the Cubitt's country house. So everybody could walk along from the house to the church, I would imagine in procession with the Cubitts in the front and everybody else following on. Pretty formal, even though it was egalitarian, they were still pretty formal in those days. And just over here you can see this lovely little school. Anybody who worked on the estate, their children would have been educated in that schoolhouse, and I bet it wasn't a bad education either. And there you can see the belfry, where the 8 bells would be. You can just see the way that they've just got that wooden lattice work there to let the sound of the bells come out. What a bit of work though, what a bit of work. Back in Victorian times, building places like this. And while I'm at it, the chalk around here, there were lime kilns down the road here. They quarried a lot of the lime that was used in London to build houses in London. So that went up on a little railway track from the lime kilns onto the main track and then all the way up to London in Victorian times. And that was a very, very busy little enterprise there for a long time. I've got my grandson Magnus with me. Say hello, Magnus.
Hello.
And he is doing the filming today. He's on the camera. He did a great job last time. Mags, you just need to move that lead out of the way. There's a lead dangling in the lens. Yeah? This is very typical of Thomas Cubitt's work. He did a lot more than this. He did houses in Brighton. He built a mile of the Thames embankment with his own money. And he also worked on a development which was called Clapham Park, which was going to be full of these grand houses all the way around what is now Clapham Common. But unfortunately, that development ran into trouble, not because of him particularly, but because the banks were starting to pull in money. There were lots of banks going bankrupt. The whole thing just ground to a halt, and they started doing infills with smaller houses. Still a very nice area, Clapham Park, Clapham Common, but that's the reason they were there. They were going to build this kind of slightly out of town development, very exclusive, and people could come in and out in their horse and carriage into central London. Now you've got to think about the actual logistics of building these and the time they were built, around about the mid-1800s, and they didn't have telephones. Obviously they didn't have a lot of other things that help us build. A lot of the joinery was made in Thomas Cubitt's own workshops down there at Pimlico. All this material had to be imported, brought in on what were just beginning, the railways really, but obviously also canals. But even getting it to the site would have involved horse and carts and all kinds of really laborious work. And it's just quite amazing that after all that, they didn't take the cheap option. They didn't go for the plainest build. They went for something lavish, something that would stand the test of time. And even when Thomas Cubitt built smaller houses, he still built them to the same standards. They were just on a bit of a smaller scale. And of course all these mews houses would also have been built by Thomas Cubitt for the horsemen. And if you want to see our video on mews houses and the development of those, have a look at our playlist. Now these are some of the smaller houses that Thomas Cubitt built, and you can see they've got roughly the same style as those larger places in Eaton Square and so on, but these are for the impoverished bankers, people who wanted to live in London, couldn't afford the trendy addresses. You'll see very similar houses down in Brighton, just up from Marine Parade. If you look up from Marine Parade on the cliffs there, you'll see a whole row of houses, again built by Cubitt, in the same style. He seemed to go for this white stucco and this kind of neoclassical look. Everyone had their own little porch so that they didn't have to stand in the rain when they were waiting for their horse and carriage, or possibly hailing a cab, a horse-drawn cab in those days. Talking about the rain, here it comes. So here we are. This is probably the original statue of the two, the one that I looked at down in Dorking, and this one at the end of Denby Street. Interesting, that Denby, because it's Denby's vineyard, Denby's house down there in Dorking, and Denby Street here, so it obviously meant something, that name. Thomas Cubitt there, it says that he was responsible for developing Belgravia and Pimlico, hence the similarity in styles. He had his big workshop here. If he was building all these grand buildings, he would have had guys turning out staircases. Remember, there were no CNC machines in those days. A lot of it was just done by hand, skirtings they would have been running through, and it would have been doors and windows and all the rest of a joinery. Stuff was being shipped out right, left and centre by horse and cart to the various building sites. So the guy must have been an absolute organisational genius. Not only was he doing that, but he was donating money to build that Thames embankment. He was involved in the grand exhibition. He was a friend of royalty. He was a mover and shaker for sure. This workshop that he had, it burned down. Obviously all those people, all their tools were lost, their livelihoods were lost, and he sent a message out to them all, and he said, don't worry guys, you will be back at work within a week. He was that confident that he could get the whole thing running again, and he also gave them a considerable amount of money in those days to go and buy themselves new tools so that they could carry on working for him. Obviously, the fact that he put all those guys on the cards and was the first person to do that and treated his men really well, treated them as friends, honoured the fact that they were good tradesmen, good craftsmen, and he was a craftsman too, so he had a real bond with them. He wasn't aloof. And when he died, Queen Victoria said that he was a lovely man. He was a very nice, gentle, pleasant man. She didn't actually give him a knighthood, which is a bit of a shame. But again, I think that's just one of those things of a day when a common builder, no matter what he achieved, no matter what he gave to the public and the charities and all the other things he did, still didn't earn himself the highest honour of the land. Great shame, but here he is. He's got a statue here, and I hope people don't just walk by it without just having a look and seeing him standing on this platform here with his pile of bricks in front of him, his tarpaulin over here, and his gauging rod here. He wasn't a bricklayer, he was a carpenter, but I bet he could lay bricks. I bet he could do everything. I should have put him down in a polymath video. God bless you, Thomas. It must be remembered that the association between Queen Victoria and Thomas Cubitt went quite a long way, because he actually built Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, which was her favourite retreat. And it's a testimony to the man that when he went there, he was concerned that he didn't rob the local builders of work. He made sure that the local builders on the Isle of Wight were fully involved in the job, and they built some of the houses around there. He also built the extensions of Buckingham Palace and a few other little bits of royal residence, so he was very involved in them and they knew him very well. Not only has he got a statue, they also have a pub, or actually I think a chain of pubs now, named after him. Thomas Cubitt, I wouldn't say he was a drinker as such, but he saw the pub as key in the sort of community, and he wasn't wrong there, was he? I mean, with them closing down at the rate of what, one a day or something crazy like that, it's nice to see that pubs still have a place, albeit this is really a gastropub, it's a restaurant, and it's another reminder of the great heritage that Thomas Cubitt has left behind. So just standing outside the pub here, and I've been joined by a skill builder viewer. What's your name, my friend?
Adam.
Adam. And Adam, you're local here.
Yeah, and I really admire your channel. It's great.
Thank you very much. That's nice of you to say. We're doing a thing on Thomas Cubitt. You know about Thomas Cubitt, obviously.
Yeah, I live in what's alleged to be one of his houses.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But my suspicion is that was probably built by somebody else because he probably subcontracted them. And they're all all the houses, they're slightly different. When you go inside them, they're different shapes, they're different depths, and then there's a difference between the grand ones on the squares, like Warwick Square and Eccleston Square, and then the smaller houses which are in the streets, like Alderney Street, and so the smaller ones were. I mean, I was told by a Westminster surveyor that actually the timber in the buildings now, in those buildings, says 1840, is much higher quality than today's regulation requires.
If you try to make a sash window today out of modern timber, it lasts 20 years, 25 years before it needs work, and of course it moves around, you know. But the old timber, slow-grown timber, Baltic pine or whatever it was, fantastic. I mean, he had this joinery shop, didn't he, down in. He had quite a premises. It burned down.
Yeah, and then he brought and then he's alleged to have brought all the soil from the docks. He was digging out over to Pimlico, because Pimlico is the marsh. But they're well ventilated, the houses.
Are they?
Yeah, they get quite a lot of air.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Anyway, thank you for your channel. Bye then.
So this is another Thomas Cubitt square. I don't think that those mansard roofs were there on the original buildings. I don't know what kind of roof they would have had, because I can't imagine it would have been a flat lead roof. So maybe they were there, but they look to me like they're all different. So they look like they've been added all the way around along the top. So he certainly had a way with the old white stucco building. Ah, look, Yehudi Menuhin. He had a school close to me. He lived there. Who knew? Of course, he taught Nigel Kennedy. So look at this, I said that Thomas Cubitt has got a pub named after him. There's almost one named after me, or my tribe anyway, the Plumber's Arms. I've got to go and have a pint in there for sure. Bit rude not to, wouldn't it?
Hey Grandad, what about me? I want a pint.